Alright everyone, so let me tell you what happened on First Take this morning because honestly, I was completely blindsided by where this conversation went and I'm still trying to wrap my head around everything that was said. I had just finished watching the Super Bowl the night before, woke up feeling pretty disappointed about how that game turned out, made myself some coffee, turned on ESPN to see what the hot takes would be about the Patriots and Seahawks, and there were Stephen A., Smith, Shannon Sharp, and Mad Dog Russo getting ready to discuss the state of the NFL after Super Bowl 60, but instead of just breaking down the game or arguing about whether Drake May deserved MVP consideration, they pivoted into this absolutely wild discussion about whether the Los Angeles Rams should be pursuing Jordan Addison from the Minnesota Vikings to add another young explosive weapon to their receiving core. And man, the way this entire segment unfolded had me sitting there completely captivated because they were covering everything from the Rams' heartbreaking playoff loss to Seattle to their need for youth and speed at receiver to whether trading assets for a player like Addison makes sense when they already have Puka Nacua and Cooper Kupp. Hey, what's up everyone? Before we dive into everything I have for you today, I need to share something real with you that would mean the absolute world to me. That subscribe button right there. Hitting it right now would bring me one step closer to my dream of reaching 1,000 subscribers. I know you're eager to get into all this content, but real quick, just smash that subscribe button and hit the notification bell. It's such a simple thing. It takes literally 1 second, but it's honestly the biggest way you can support this journey and help me reach that milestone. Trust me, every single subscription gets me closer to that goal. And honestly, it would mean everything to me. So do me that quick favor right now and be part of this dream becoming reality. The show opened in this really unexpected way because instead of immediately jumping into the Jordan Addison discussion, Stephen A. started by absolutely tearing into the Super Bowl and calling it one of the most boring championship games he's ever watched. He had this disgusted look on his face and he goes, "Now listen, that Super Bowl last night was an absolute stinker, and you know what would have made it better? If the Los Angeles Rams had been playing in that game instead of the Patriots." And you could tell by his tone that he was genuinely frustrated. Stephen A. continued, "The Rams were the second best team in the entire NFL this season. They should have been in that Super Bowl, and if they had been, we would have seen an actual entertaining game instead of that defensive slog we just watched." So the question becomes, what do the Rams need to do this offseason to make sure they get over the hump and actually make it to the Super Bowl next year? Shannon Sharp immediately jumped in and he started breaking down the Rams this season and why they fell just short of reaching the Super Bowl. Shannon was talking about how the Rams went 12-5 in the regular season, how they had one of the best offenses in the entire league with Matthew Stafford playing at an MVP level, how they beat the Panthers and the Bears in the playoffs, but then they ran into Seattle in that NFC Championship game and just couldn't get it done. Shannon made this really compelling point about how the game was played in Seattle in terrible weather conditions, and he thinks if that game had been played at a neutral site or in good weather, the Rams probably would have won and advanced to the Super Bowl. Mad Dog came in absolutely fired up, and he was yelling about how the Rams belong in that Super Bowl, how they were robbed by having to play in Seattle in those brutal conditions, and how the NFL needs to reconsider giving teams such massive home field advantages in championship games. He brought up how the Rams put up 1,500 yards on the Seahawks over 3 games during the regular season and playoffs, and how it was only the weather and the crowd noise in Seattle that prevented them from advancing. Mad Dog was really emphasizing how the Rams are so close to being championship caliber, and they just need to make a few more moves to get over that hump. Stephen A. brought the conversation specifically to Jordan Addison, and this is where things really got interesting. He started breaking down Addison's situation in Minnesota and why he would be such a perfect fit for what the Rams are trying to do offensively. Stephen A. was talking about how Addison is only 23 years old and already has 2 productive seasons under his belt, how he's one of the best route runners in the league and creates consistent separation, and how his ability to gain yards after the catch would fit perfectly into Sean McVay's offensive scheme. Stephen A. was really emphasizing how the Rams need to add more young talent to their roster because they've been relying too heavily on veterans, and Addison represents exactly that type of player. Shannon jumped back in and started talking about the fit from a scheme perspective and why Jordan Addison would thrive in Sean McVay's offense. He was breaking down how McVay loves to use motion and shifts to create favorable matchups for his receivers, how he designs plays that get receivers the ball in space, and how Addison's skill set of running precise routes and making plays after the catch would be devastating in that system. Shannon made this point about how the Rams already have Puka Nacua, who's a physical contested catch receiver, and adding Addison, who's more of a separator and route technician, would give them two completely different types of threats that defenses would struggle to account for. Mad Dog interrupted, and he started talking about the youth element and why the Rams desperately need to get younger at the receiver position. He was explaining how Cooper Kupp is getting older and has dealt with injuries throughout his career, how they can't rely on him to be their #1 receiver for much longer, and how they need to start thinking about what their receiving core looks like beyond Kupp. Mad Dog was making this point about how Jordan Addison is young enough that he could be a cornerstone of the Rams offense for the next 5 to 7 years if they extend him, and that kind of long-term stability at the position is invaluable. Stephen A came back and started talking about what it would actually cost to acquire Jordan Addison from Minnesota. He was speculating about different trade packages, talking about how maybe it would take one of those first-round picks the Rams have, or maybe it would take a second and a third, or maybe they could package some young players with picks. Stephen A was being realistic about the fact that the Vikings aren't just going to give away a young, talented receiver for nothing, but he was also saying that Addison's value might not be as high as it could be because he hasn't quite become a true #1 receiver yet and has had some off-field issues. Shannon got back in there, and he started talking about how the Rams' offensive system would actually help Jordan Addison reach his full potential. He was explaining how Addison has been good in Minnesota, but hasn't quite broken out into superstardom yet, and a lot of that might be due to the system he's in and the quarterback throwing him the ball. Shannon made this point about how if you put Addison in Sean McVay's offense with Matthew Stafford throwing him the ball, he could easily become a 1,000-yard receiver every single season and potentially even better than that. Mad Dog jumped in and started talking about the Matthew Stafford factor and why adding Jordan Addison would help extend Stafford's career and effectiveness. He was explaining how Stafford just won MVP and proved he can still play at an elite level, but he's not getting any younger, and the Rams need to surround him with as many weapons as possible to maximize whatever time he has left. Mad Dog was making this point about how when you have a Hall of Fame quarterback playing at a high level, you owe it to him to give him every possible tool to succeed, and Addison would be exactly that type of tool. Stephen A then shifted the conversation to talk about the Super Bowl and how the Rams would have fared if they had made it instead of the Patriots. He was breaking down how the Rams offense with Stafford, Puka, Kupp, and their other weapons would have absolutely shredded the Seahawks defense in good weather on a neutral field, and how we were robbed of what could have been an incredible Super Bowl matchup. Stephen A was arguing that the NFL needs to reconsider how they structure their playoff games because weather shouldn't play such a massive role in determining who advances to the championship. Shannon came back and he made an interesting point about how the Rams have a really short championship window and they need to be aggressive this offseason. He was talking about how they have 2 first-round picks to work with, how they have cap space, how they have a roster that's close to being championship caliber, and how they can't afford to be conservative. Shannon was arguing that trading for Jordan Addison would be exactly the type of aggressive move that shows they're serious about winning a Super Bowl while Stafford is still playing at a high level. Mad Dog started getting animated again, and he was talking about how the NFC is wide open next year, and the Rams have as good a chance as anyone to win it. He was explaining how the Seahawks just got lucky with home field advantage and weather, how the 49ers are getting older and dealing with injuries, how the Eagles are dysfunctional, and how the Rams with 1 or 2 more pieces could absolutely be the team to beat in the conference. Mad Dog was really passionate about how the Rams need to strike while the iron is hot. Stephen A brought up the financial aspect of potentially acquiring Jordan Addison and how the Rams would handle his contract situation. He was talking about how Addison is still on his rookie deal, which makes him incredibly valuable because you're getting elite production at a team-friendly price, and how that kind of contract flexibility is important for a team like the Rams who have other expensive contracts on the books. Stephen A was explaining how if they trade for Addison now, they'd have him for at least 1 more year on his rookie deal before having to negotiate an extension, and that gives them time to evaluate whether he's worth a long-term commitment. Shannon jumped back in and started talking about how Jordan Addison would fit into the Rams locker room culture and whether there would be any concerns about his off-field issues. He was explaining how Addison has had a DUI arrest and some other incidents, but the Rams have a strong veteran presence with guys like Stafford and others who could help mentor him. Shannon was arguing that the talent is worth taking a calculated risk on, especially if the Rams do their homework and feel good about his character. Mad Dog came back and he was talking about what the Rams receiving core would look like if they successfully acquired Jordan Addison. He was painting this picture of having Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp, and Jordan Addison as your top 3 receivers, and how that would give Sean McVay so many options when he's designing plays and game planning against different defenses. Mad Dog was making this point about how having 3 legitimate weapons at receiver would make the Rams offense absolutely unstoppable and would take so much pressure off the running game.